Hello and welcome to the basics of animal mounts in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. This presentation builds on information provided in our Basics of Animals video, so if you have not seen that one already, you are encouraged to go view that before watching this one. If an animal is at least one size category larger than you might be able to ride it into combat. Horses are the most commonly thought of mount, but in Pathfinder, mounts run a far wider range of animals. Halflings might ride atop large dogs, or goblins might ride geckos into battle. To ride an animal, you must be standing in an adjacent space to it and spend one action to use mount. The mount activity is used to get onto or off of an animal. If the animal is willing to be your mount, then you're good to go. But if it's not willing, then it might try and kick you off. Some animals, like direwolves, goblin dogs, ponies, and horses, can spend a reaction to kick an unwanted rider off of them. When they do so, the rider must pass a reflex saving throw, the DC of which is listed in the animal stat block. On a failure, the rider falls prone into an adjacent square but suffers no damage other than to their pride. But on a critical failure, they also take 1d6 bludgeoning damage too. Determining when an animal attempts to buck a rider off of them is entirely up to the GM, but I would think that if that animal has an attitude of unfriendly or hostile, then it's pretty much a given, as well as when it becomes spooked or panicked in combat. Once you successfully mount a creature, it functions a little bit differently than regular animals. The first difference is that the mount acts on your initiative instead of on its own. You still have to spend your actions on command an animal to get the mount to do anything. You just don't have to wait for the mount to perform those actions. The mount does so immediately on your turn. So for example, if you're mounted on a horse and wish to ride it 40 feet, you would spend one action on command an animal and roll a nature check against the horse's will DC. On a success, it immediately performs a stride action and moves as you direct it. This assumes the character is not a trained rider. For an easier time managing mounts, players can take the ride feat at first level. This feat allows you to automatically succeed on nature checks when using command an animal to move your mount. Mounts will only take actions that their rider directs them to. So if the rider spends all three of their actions without using command an animal, then the mount is going to do nothing that turn and just stand still. When in combat, you and your mount function as one unit, meaning you share a multiple attack penalty. If you spend an action to strike an enemy and then use command an animal to tell your mount to attack, it will do so with the usual -5 penalty for multiple attacks. Also, when riding a mount that is size large or huge, you are considered to be occupying every space that the mount occupies, meaning you can make melee attacks against any enemy that is adjacent to the mount. You do not need to specify which of the mount spaces is the one that the rider is occupying. Also, weapons that have the reach trait are treated a little bit differently when the mount is size large or huge. In those cases, you can strike any adjacent square with weapons that have 5 or 10 feet of reach. But you must have a weapon with 15 feet of reach to strike a target that is 2 squares away from the mount, including diagonally. Also note that some weapons, like lances, have the Jousting trait. These weapons gain a bonus to damage equal to its number of damage dice if you spend the action immediately before the strike to move at least 10 feet. Also, while mounted, you can wield a jousting weapon in only one hand, but its base damage is reduced to the die listed with the jousting trait. So, for example, a rider is wielding a lance. It deals 1d8 piercing damage and has the jousting trait listed with d6. When wielding it with both hands, the lance deals 1d8 damage, plus 1 point more if the action immediately before the attack was spent moving at least 10 feet. The amount of bonus damage is equal to the number of damage dice for the weapon. Since lances deal 1 die of damage, which is a d8, they get a +1 bonus to damage when moving 10 feet before the attack. If they dealt 2d8 damage, then they would deal an extra 2 points of damage when moving at least 10 feet before the attack. Again, the amount of bonus damage is equal to the number of dice rolled for a typical attack with that weapon. You do not add the dice listed with the Jousting trait as the bonus damage. So for our lance, it is +1 damage, not +1d6 damage. The rider could also choose to wield the lance with only one hand, thus allowing them to carry a shield with the other, but on a successful strike, it would only deal 1d6 damage instead of 1d8, but would still inflict another +1 damage if again it moved at least 10 feet before the attack. And also, while we're on the topic of weapons, longbows and composite longbows may not be used while mounted. As mentioned before, you and your mount occupy all the spaces that the mount occupies, meaning if any square the mount is within range of an enemy's attack, then so are you. Unless they're using an area attack, enemies must specify if they are targeting the mount or its rider. Riders gain the benefits of lesser cover from their mounts, which is a +1 bonus to their armor class, but they also suffer a -2 penalty to all of their reflex saves while they're mounted. A mount's defenses may be increased with Barding, which is basically armor for animals. All animals are considered to be trained in light Barding, and combat animals, like warhorses, are trained in heavy Barding as well. Barding for animals essentially works the same as armor for characters, except its strength requirement is displayed as a strength modifier instead of a strength score, and Barding cannot be enchanted with magic runes, but special magical Barding does exist. In this video, we discussed the basics of animal mounts. If you would like to see a couple examples on how animals work during gameplay, you can do so by viewing the next video in this series, which is linked in the description, in the playlist, and should also be linked in the upper right portion of this screen as well. Any willing animal that is at least one size category larger than you might be able to be ridden. To ride an animal, you first use the mount activity. If the animal is not willing to be ridden, it may attempt to buck you off. Buck is a reaction that forces the character to make a reflex save against a DC that is listed in that animal's stat block. On a failed save, the rider falls prone into an adjacent square. Mounts act on their rider's turn in initiative, and only act when they are ordered to do so via the command an animal activity. The ride feat removes the need to roll a nature check when commanding a mount to move. In combat, the rider occupies all of the squares that its mount occupies. Mounts and their rider also share the same multiple attack penalty. Weapons with the Jousting trait gain a bonus to damage when the action immediately before the attack is spent moving at least 10 feet. Riders gain a +1 bonus to armor class for lesser cover, but also suffer a -2 penalty to their reflex saves while they are mounted. And a mount's armor class may be increased with Barding. Before we close, I'd like to take a moment to thank all of our patrons. These videos would not be possible without their continued generosity and support. Members of the Basics for Gamers Patreon community receive special benefits, like getting to vote on the topics that we cover in the future, and also they get to see these videos 1 week and ad-free before everybody else. Visit the link shown on the left of the screen and in the description if you'd like to know more about becoming a patron. If you would like to support this channel and help it grow, the easiest way to do that is by subscribing and clicking the bell icon so you get notified when new videos release. And we can always be reached through our Twitter and Facebook pages too. Thanks for watching, take care, and we will see you soon with more Basics of Pathfinder.